People put their lives on the screen. They put really intimate details of their lives out there, and with very little thought that there might be people using that information in ways that are not benign.
It's innate in us to want to take certain facts and certain details about our lives and keep them to ourselves and only release them to people that we trust, people that we value, and people that understand us. But as we move forward in time, where the ability to control that information is becoming less and less easy, we have to ask ourselves, how do we protect those facts? How do we keep our privacy in a digital age?
I think that people are only beginning to understand what it might mean to post things about yourself in a public forum that then might be looked at by people that you work with, or might be looked at by people that might employ you in the future. Or, that whole area, I think, is where people are now only beginning to have a think about what that might mean for them.
Privacy matters because we all need a margin of discretion around our lives so that we can exercise some control over them. The fact of the matter is that we've already long ago given up much of our privacy as soon as we started to email and use mobile telephones. But if you thought about what it would be like if your neighbours knew details of your bank account or your medical record, or could listen into your quarrels with your spouse, you would be very disconcerted, because you would feel that you were losing control over areas of your life that just belong to you. That's why privacy really matters. And the great worry that we have in the digital age is that we've already given so much of it up, both to private agencies and to public ones. Every single time we go online, every time we look at a website, every time we send an email message, every time we make a phone call with our mobile telephones, we're exposing ourselves, we're stripping ourselves naked to the view of anybody who is interested to find out what we're doing. We know already that private agencies are keen to look at the pattern of use of the internet that we indulge in so that they can target advertising at us. And governments in the Western world, indeed in the world at large, are anxious to keep a record of who people are talking to, what kind of information they're finding out, so that they can detect patterns of, that suggest crime or terrorism in the offing. And in all these ways, therefore, we expose ourselves to view through the use of these devices. Not that we would want to give up using these devices, they're just so useful to us, but they do expose us to scrutiny.
Well, one way in which you'll give up personal information is obviously by clicking on one thing or another that reveals the sorts of things you're interested in. But how would they get from that to actually figuring out, for instance, who you are? Well, it's well known in the privacy world that things like your birth date, your gender, and your postal code or zip code will allow people to figure out who you actually are, what your true name is. Now, how might a website get that information from you? Well, let's say you want to sign up for a horoscope. Then you're going to give them your birth date and probably tell them whether or not you're a man or a woman. Then maybe you want to find out what your local weather is. Probably the easiest way to do that is to put in your postal code or zip code. And bingo, they've got 3 pieces of information that are going to make it really easy for them to figure out exactly who you are.
We should be very worried, I think, about the amount of data concerning ourselves, including very personal, private, intimate data about ourselves, which is now out there in the public domain, both in private and in public hands. We should be worried about it for a large number of reasons, but one central reason is that this information is stored digitally in one or another location out there in a way that we may not have access to ourselves. And it's very, very easily manipulated. It's very easily changed by somebody who is either lazy, incompetent, or malevolent in some way. It's very easy for that information to be shared, and for patterns of information to seem to appear to certain agencies that could put one under suspicion, even if one weren't a suspicious individual. In other words, the prospect for misinformation, for corruption of our personal information, and for mistakes to be made about our personal information is massively increased by the fact that there is so much of it out there and so much of it is collated by different agencies. Inefficiency and patchiness of information is a great protection of personal privacy. And the more efficient the systems are that collect and collate data about us, the more the potential is for mistaken misuse.
With the CEO of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, who in an infamous interview in 2010 pronounced that privacy is no longer a, quote, social norm. Last year, Mark Zuckerberg and his new wife purchased not only their own house, but also all 4 adjacent houses in Palo Alto for a total of $30 million in order to ensure that they enjoyed a zone of privacy that prevented other people from monitoring what they do in their personal lives. Over the last 16 months, as I've debated this issue around the world, every single time somebody has said to me, I don't really worry about invasions of privacy because I don't have anything to hide, I always say the same thing to them. I get out a pen, I write down my email address, I say, here's my email address. What I want you to do when you get home is email me the passwords to all of your email accounts. Not just the nice, respectable work one in your name, but all of them. Because I want to be able to just troll through what it is you're doing online, read what I want to read, and publish whatever I find interesting. After all, if you're not a bad person, if you're doing nothing wrong, you should have nothing to hide.
Most people are unaware of how exposed they've made themselves. I mean, you talk to young people, for example, who've got their own personal blog sites or their presence on YouTube or Facebook, and that they may come to regret doing some of the things they did on video, on the internet, or saying the things that they did, especially when they start applying for jobs and employers begin to look back through the digital record of these people, the trace that they've left in the public domain. But quite unaware, every single day that we do something digital, we are potentially leaving a trace out there, and that if somebody wanted to find out where we were shopping, what we were doing, who we were communicating with, why we were doing it, what websites we were logging on to, they could do it. Well, we've had examples recently in the United Kingdom of very sensitive information about individuals, health records, military, police records, being lost because they've been left on a CD in the back of somebody's motor car. We've had examples of people being able to hack into what should be very, very secure systems. For example, as I speak, there is an extradition warrant out for an individual in the United Kingdom who hacked into the United States Navy, military, NASA, and the Defense Department computers nearly 100 times. Now, this kind of thing is tremendously worrying, because you can imagine that if a private investigator or the police or a criminal organization was trying to blackmail somebody or try to get personal information or just trying to get your or my credit card numbers, that it would be relatively easy for them to do it, given the porousness of these data storage instruments and the fact that it's very, very difficult to keep them secure and to police them properly. So by giving up so much of our personal information, as we do every time we buy something online or every time we talk to somebody on a mobile phone, we're exposing ourselves to risk. And one can think that in the records of, for example, British banks, people claiming that their credit card numbers have been misused, there would be thousands and thousands of such cases every year.
They don't think about how meaningful location can be. If you go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, if you visit an oncologist who specializes in cancer, if you visit a bar, these are all places where you're simply being there says something about you that might be viewed as stigmatizing, or at the very least, something that you don't want others to know about. The ability to gather data about location over time, creates the possibility of seeing these patterns in your behavior and making some very strong inferences about what you do and what kind of a person you are. And then, of course, maybe an additional wrinkle is it's not just about you, right? It's also about the people that you are with, because if my mobile phone is being tracked and another person's mobile phone is being tracked. When you connect those dots on a more grand 24/7 basis, you'll see when these dots are together and where they're not. There's a great example from several years ago. Researchers at Cambridge, I believe, were doing a study of what they were calling ambient Bluetooth activity. They wanted to know, back in the day before Bluetooth devices were really common, just how many Bluetooth devices are there? And so all the folks who worked in the lab had their Bluetooth devices on in promiscuous mode. Well, when they were analyzing the data, they were able to see that 2 of these devices were always syncing together Friday evenings and Saturday evenings. And they could see from the data that one of these was a man in the office and the other was a woman. And so they were easily able to infer that these 2 were a couple outside the office, even though no one knew or would have guessed from their in-office behavior. The potential for location tracking to reveal not just information about yourself, but about the relationships you have with other people is unparalleled, and that's one reason why we're so concerned about location privacy.
Law enforcement agencies across the country are establishing a thing called drone zones. Sound fun? Not fun. What they're going to do is they're going to put up drones in the air that would monitor, record, store, to be used at any time in the future that they see fit. If you're still thinking, I don't do anything wrong, it's not going to matter to me, wait till the time that gets hacked and your phone conversation is leaked online, taken out of context, your email is pulled aside. All of us have had the moment where you got an email from a group, hit reply, sent back a snarky reply to one of your friends in that group, hit send, heard the swoosh, looked down and thought, oh my, I did reply all. We have to be able to keep those things secret. So where the technology is going to go in the future is it's going to get smaller, it's going to become more pervasive, and it's going to become easier to be used, taken out of context, and abused. If you're one of those people, any one of the spectrum, mountain in the woods, locking the bathroom door, it doesn't matter to me. What does matter to me is this, is that you recognize that we have a unique opportunity under the law. We have a unique opportunity under law to establish a community where we say we care about privacy rights on both ends of the spectrum. Whenever you're thinking about the privacy that you have and the privacy that you could eventually lose, I just want you to keep this in mind, and this goes back to Dr. Gerard's research quite a bit. If we cannot protect ourselves, ultimately, we cannot be ourselves.
Now, there's a reason why privacy is so craved universally and instinctively. It isn't just a reflexive movement like breathing air or drinking water. The reason is that when we're in a state where we can be monitored, where we can be watched, our behavior changes dramatically. The range of behavioral options that we consider when we think we're being watched severely reduce. This is just a fact of human nature that has been recognized in social science and in literature and in religion and in virtually every field of discipline. There are dozens of psychological studies that prove that when somebody knows that they might be watched, the behavior they engage in is vastly more conformist and compliant. Human shame is a very powerful motivator, as is the desire to avoid it. And that's the reason why people, when they're in a state of being watched, make decisions not that are the byproduct of their own agency, but that are about the expectations that others have of them, or the mandates of societal orthodoxy. The last point I want to observe about this mindset, the idea that only people who are doing nothing wrong have things to hide and therefore reasons to care about privacy, is that it entrenches 2 very destructive messages, 2 destructive lessons. The first of which is that the only people who care about privacy, the only people who will seek out privacy are by definition bad people. This is a conclusion that we should have all kinds of reasons for avoiding. The most important of which is that when you say somebody who's doing bad things, you probably mean things like plotting a terrorist attack or engaging in violent criminality, a much narrower conception of what people who wield power mean when they say doing bad things. For them, doing bad things typically means doing something that poses meaningful challenges to the exercise of our own power. The other really destructive and I think even more insidious lesson that comes from accepting this mindset is there's an implicit bargain that people who accept this mindset have accepted. And that bargain is this: if you're willing to render yourself sufficiently harmless, sufficiently unthreatening to those who wield political power, then and only then can you be free of the dangers of surveillance. It's only those who are dissidents, who challenge power, who have something to worry about. There are all kinds of reasons why we should want to avoid that lesson as well. You may be a person who right now doesn't want to engage in that behavior, but at some point in the future you might. Even if you're somebody who decides you never want to, the fact that there are other people who are willing to and able to resist and be adversarial to those in power, dissidents and journalists and activists and a whole range of others, is something that brings us all collective good that we should want to preserve. Equally critical is that the measure of how free a society is not how it treats its good, obedient, compliant citizens, but how it treats its dissidents and those who resist orthodoxy. But the most important reason is that a system of mass surveillance suppresses our own freedom in all sorts of ways. It renders off limits all kinds of behavioral choices without our even knowing that it's happened. The renowned socialist activist Rosa Luxemburg once said, "He who does not move does not notice his chains." We can try and render the chains of mass surveillance invisible or undetectable, but the constraints that it imposes on us do not become any less potent. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Good job.